Now I'll introduce our main speaker for the evening, Dr. Chris Jones. He is a hydrologist at the University of Iowa. He coordinates activities related to the Iowa Water Quality Information System and conducts research on nutrient and sediment transport and general water quality data and information such as nitrate, pH, and dissolved oxygen concentrations, discharge rates, and temperature. He also has a marvelous podcast called We All Want Clean H2O. Chris will be presenting an overview of water quality across the state of Iowa and the major contributing sources of pollutants, as well as Iowa's significant contribution to the Mississippi River catchment area and the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Dr. Jones.
Well, I'm happy to be invited here tonight to speak to you folks, and I've been down here in Fairfield to speak a few times over the past few years, and been here to Lake Darling, and so I know some folks down here, so it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. And so I'll talk to you about some things tonight, and hopefully give you some things to think about. And so I would tell you that I post all my slides on my website, so if anybody wants my slides, they can go there and download them. I don't have these on there yet, but I'll have them on there tomorrow. And so you can see that presentations, maybe you can see that there, that's where I post them. I also write essays pretty regularly, put them in that blog post page, and if you're interested in my thoughts on things, you can go there and see what those are. And some of those aren't terrible, I think, but anyway, you can be the judge of that. And so, yes, I do manage the university's water quality sensor network. We have a system of water quality sensors deployed around the state of Iowa, about 70 sites measuring water quality continuously, mostly in streams, but also some groundwater and some surface water lakes. And so you can see the sites there. The funding for the system comes mainly from three places. One is the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, which is at Iowa State University. It's funded through the groundwater tax. Used to fund the Leopold Center, doesn't anymore, funds the Nutrient Center. And so that funds my job and 2 field staff that operate and maintain the system. We have sites funded through the Iowa Watershed Approach Project, which is money from the Housing and Urban Development. And then we also harvest data from USGS sensors around the state. I think they have about 8 or 10 sites right now. And so that all goes into the system. We measure nitrate at all the sites, and then a subset of the sites we're measuring temperature, pH, conductivity, dissolved oxygen, and turbidity. And all that data goes onto this marvelous website. And it's really quite a useful tool for people to learn about water quality in Iowa. Some real geniuses designed this thing. That wasn't me, some other guys. And so it's really a great tool. So you can click on one of the sites, and it'll delineate the watershed area upstream of the monitoring site, tell you what the nitrate is, tell you what the discharge, the flow of the river is, and a lot of other data. You can get precipitation information on there. Land use, you can see what percentage of the watershed is in crops, what percentage is in urban areas, and so forth. And it's really a marvelous tool. And so I'd invite you to check that out if you haven't. And so when I talk to people about water quality in Iowa, I always say you need to understand Iowa's geologic past if you're going to understand water quality. And our geologic past is one of glaciation. And so Iowa has been, glaciers have intruded into Iowa, we think 7 times, but there's been 3 main events. The first one is the pre-Illinois event where ice descended over the entire state pretty much down to the present course of the Missouri River. That ended 500,000 years ago. We had the Illinoisan period where ice kind of intruded into southeast Iowa. And if you know Iowa City, you know Iowa City's pretty hilly, and you drive just south of Iowa City and it gets pretty flat, and that's where that ice came over in the pre-Illinoisan period. And actually the Mississippi prehistoric channel, the Mississippi River, was actually the Cedar River bed in the present day, and so that's where that ice was. And then lastly, the one we talked about most, the Wisconsin Glacier. This tongue of ice came down from Minnesota into north central Iowa. And so this ended only 10,000 years ago, very, very recently. And so what we see in that part of Iowa is all very new, okay, very fresh. And so because of glaciation, Iowa, and the erosion that has occurred throughout the millennia, we have these different landforms in Iowa. And so when we drive across Iowa, to the casual observer, they might think, well, it all looks homogeneous. And we only have 2 species out there, right? Corn and soybeans, and so it looks the same to most people. But if you know what you're looking for, you can see where the landforms change and where the glaciers were and weren't. And so you can see there the Des Moines Lobe, where the Wisconsin Glacier was, the southern Iowa Drift Plain, where we are now. Northwest Iowa Plains and the Iowan surface were both prehistoric tundras that were shaped by wind erosion from wind blowing off that Wisconsin glacier. The Paleozoic Plateau in northeast Iowa, a lot of people call that the driftless area, right? Thinking there's never been glaciers there. Well, there has been in the driftless area, at least the Iowa portion. The Wisconsin part of the driftless is the only one that has not had any glaciation at all. And then we have the major river floodplains. And so prior to Europeans getting here, this is what Iowa looked like. We had the wetland ecosystem, the oak savanna, and the tall grass prairie. And of course, that's all gone, right? We've all plowed that up for crops. About 70–75% of our land now is in crops, as you can see there in brown. We still have some pasture and some timber in central Iowa and then northeast Iowa primarily. And in that pre-settlement period, we know that the prairie streams that we had were these wide, shallow streams, okay, that had a rocky or a sandy or gravel bottom. We had perennial cover on the stream banks with the prairie, okay, so we never had any bare soil. The streams came out into the floodplain very frequently, okay? And we had clean water species in our streams like smallmouth bass and pumpkin seed sunfish, and then the generalist species, the catfish, channel catfish. And then we got here, and one of the main things we did was we started draining the land, right? And so much of Iowa was pretty wet. Our soils hold a lot of water. They're called hydric soils. We get pretty abundant rainfall here most years, and so the landscape was wet. To crop it, we needed to dry it out, and so we started digging, especially in the Des Moines Lobe area, but also other places. And so you can see these fellows here, Boone County, putting in the clay field tiles about 100 years ago. We made these trapezoidal ditches with the steam shovels. And you can see in the modern day on the right there, that's what it looks like. And so we lowered the water table 4 feet, basically over about 70% of Iowa. And so these big ditches, right, up in the upper right-hand stream there, are the drainage district ditches. And so we created thousands of miles of streams here, right? So there's many, many more miles of streams here than what there used to be. And we continue this drainage, right? And so those guys with down in the trench digging might have been able to do an acre a day. These guys can do, you know, an acre in a matter of an hour or so with these tile plows. And so as it has gotten wetter here in Iowa, farmers have been highly motivated to put in more tile and dry out the landscape, and that's the primary delivery mechanism for nitrate from farmed fields to the stream network. And so consequently, this is the start of many of our streams. This is what the beginning of our streams look like. And so these big county tile mains, in the northern 2/3 of the state, they form the beginning of our streams, and so that's the start of the Raccoon River near Marathon, Iowa. And so right here, this is the start of the Iowa River in north central Iowa. And so we can see the tiles coming in, the drainage ditch, and what we don't think about here is when we did this, we immediately put 3 foot ahead on the water. And so imagine before drainage, how these streams started. They were wetlands sort of gently overflowing into a stream channel. Now we immediately put 3 foot of energy on that water. And so the streams are much more highly energized now than what they were. And so then in the 30s we came in and we started straightening streams. And so we used steam shovels and dynamite. And so this is Walnut Creek in Jasper County. The green line is the stream channel in 1930. The red line is the stream channel today. And so we cut that stream from 1,000 meters long to 500 meters long in that stretch. But the vertical distance from point A to point B is the same, right? But the stream has half the distance between A and B. So what we did is we sped up that water. We've made our water, we've added energy to our water, to our streams all over the state of Iowa. And so that's had consequences. Well, let me go back. And so this is what happened to our streams on the right. And so as we channelized them, they started eroding downward. Okay, they had this energy. We put levees along the stream banks so we could square up the fields and farm that stuff. And so the stream still wants to erode. And so it erodes downward. And so consequently, most of our streams in Iowa here are about a stage 4 right here at this point of degradation. And so I tell people, a lot of these streams, they are not coming back, okay? Like the English River, it's been straightened. It's in this state of degradation. You know, to bring it back, we'd have to re-meander it. And I mean, you're talking about just a monumental amount of money to do that on a large scale. And so as we say, for a lot of this stuff in Iowa, it's going to take another ice age to bring it back. And so this is Walnut Creek in Jasper County. And so these streams have become so flashy now. And so this is the same spot. So you see that hill slope in the background. And that guy standing there. And that soil there in the bottom, in what we call the alluvium, about the first 4 to 6 feet of that has all been deposited since settlement. Okay? And so as we farmed the uplands and we got all this erosion, all that dirt didn't just go down to the Gulf of Mexico, it was deposited in the alluvium in the lowlands. And so all that stuff, since it was very recently deposited within the last century, it's loose, it's not consolidated, and so it's very vulnerable to erosion from being eroded away. And so these streams are so flashy because we don't have any vegetation on the landscape but for 4 months out of the year, and they've been straightened, and they have so much energy that these streams come up, and this is no kidding. This stream can go from here to here and back to there in 24 hours. And so that exposed soil, right, is really vulnerable to loss. So consequently, our streams are always muddy. And we think that it's because of field erosion. Well, that's part of it. But this is a lot of it. It's because of this change in hydrology and the fact that we've straightened all these streams. And so now, you know, all our streams are down in these canyons. And if you didn't know any better, you would think that's what they should look like, right? No, that's not what they were. And so now we have these pollution tolerant species like carp and bullhead. We still have the generalist with the channel catfish that can tolerate these conditions. And so that hydrological condition that we have, none of our native species that we want to see in these streams, they didn't evolve in that condition, right? And so, you know, they can't survive. And so now we have the tile drainage. Instead of perennial cover on the stream banks, we have annual plants. Corn and soybean, they're only there 4 months. We've silted in the bottom, and so the gravel substrate that the desirable species need to spawn, you know, that's all silted in. The water table is much, much deeper now. And so like this stream here on the right side, that's the South Skunk River, southeast of Ames. And I mean, it's straightened for, you know, a couple 100 miles. And, you know, what species evolved to live in that, you know, sort of condition? None, right? And so all we have are these species that we don't want. And so at the same time we were doing all this hydrological modification, we also were transforming our farming systems. And so this is very famous illustration by a guy, DNR made it in the 1970s. In fact, I just met that guy a few months ago. He's still alive. This is Winnebago County, and you can see we had a big diversity of land uses on a farm. And so not only did you have corn, but you had a few soybeans, you had oats, a lot of pasture, hay, and so on. And then this same farm, we fast forward to 1976, you know, and it's almost all corn and soybeans. There's still a few oats left there. Those would be gone in the present day. And so we simplified our farming systems, okay? We went from diverse systems to real simple systems. And so now our farms look like this, and you know, you drive through here and you think, wow, that looks clean, right? Really clean. And so we have the GMO crops, you know, no weeds out there at all. We have, you know, 1 out of every 3 hogs in the United States, 25 million hogs. This Washington County is the top hog county in the state. You can drive across the whole state and never see a hog, right? And so they're all in these buildings up on the horizon. And then we have ethanol. And so this is our farming now in Iowa. And to the casual observer, it looks very clean. But in fact, you know, this is all a very leaky system that we know, you know, pollutes our water resources. And so then we add to that, you know, the livestock industry, and we have about 8,000 permitted animal feeding operations now. You can see they're not evenly distributed around the state. A lot in northwest Iowa, a lot here in southeast Iowa, and then north central Iowa. And so, you know, we have an issue of scale here, the way we're trying to farm. It's not that these individual farmers are doing this, that, or the other thing wrong. We are trying to do things at such a scale here in a way that's not regulated, that unless everybody is doing everything perfectly, you know, we're going to have bad water. And so, as I said, we have a problem of scale, and that's one thing we never want to talk about. You know, we want to talk about these cost share practices that farmers can do, but we never stop and ask ourselves, is what we're doing here really what is possible? Or, you know, are our environmental objectives consistent with the scale of things that we're doing here? And I would say they are not. And so we have 70% of our land in annual crops. We have 11,000 square miles of the state of Iowa is used for ethanol production. So an area equivalent of 20 Iowa counties we've committed to grow corn for ethanol. We have 25 million hogs, and bear in mind that a hog reaches market weight in 6 months, so really in a year we have 50 million. 4 million beef cattle, 80 million laying chickens, 5 million turkeys, 4 million broiler chickens, and 22,000 dairy cows, 220,000 dairy cows. Can you do this here and still get clean water? And you know, you got a $14 million, I think, or $16 million project out here that you did only 8 years ago, and it's still polluted, right? And it's because we didn't think about this and say, wow, you know, can we make this out here consistent with this? And so what we've done here is have water quality consequences. The ones we talk about most, of course, are erosion, and then also the nutrient pollution. We've got problems with our drinking water. We have 7,000 private wells in Iowa that have tested above the nitrate, safe level for nitrate since the year 2000. 7,000 private wells. We always talk about Des Moines, right? The nitrate removal facility, the biggest in the world. People in Des Moines. It's really the rural areas of Iowa that suffer economically from this pollution. Des Moines, they've got the resources to cope with it. But these small towns, you contaminate their well. I mean, that's a financial burden for a town of declining population where much of the town is elderly. You know, what do you do with these places? And then, of course, we have what we do as consequences, you know, 2,000 miles away from here in the Gulf of Mexico with hypoxia. And then we see similar issues in the Great Lakes, especially Lake Erie. The farming systems in western Ohio and eastern Indiana are very similar to what we have here with tile drainage and a lot of livestock. And so, you know, we have the issues with Lake Erie. Again, the Gulf of Mexico, if you don't know, the nutrients from the Corn Belt get down into the Gulf. They catalyze these big algae blooms. The algae, as they die, they consume oxygen, right? And then that leaves the water unsuitable for the fish and the shrimp and whatever else. And so we have this dead zone. And so I always say, you know, we're killing off part of an ocean. When you kill off part of an ocean 2,000 miles away, you know you're not doing something right? And so, what is our contribution to that? And some of this is my own work that was published. And so here you can see Iowa, about 31% of our land drains to the Missouri, about 69% to the upper Mississippi. And you can see our place there in the entire Mississippi River Basin. Nitrogen, let's look at nitrate, nitrogen. The Missouri River watershed, huge, right? Goes clear to the Continental Divide. Iowa, we have 3.3% of the land in the Missouri River watershed. We contribute 12% of the water. We contribute 55% of the nitrate to the Missouri River. And so the Missouri River, some years would have almost no nitrate were it not for contributions from Iowa. And so you can see the green bar is our nitrate contribution, the blue bar is our water contribution, and the red line is our portion of the watershed. And so you can see 2006, 2011, the Missouri really would have almost no nitrate were it not for Iowa. The upper Mississippi, and so that's everything draining east in Iowa. We have 21% of the land, 21% of the water. We contribute 45% of the nitrate to the upper Mississippi. And that's the upper Mississippi we define basically as everything upstream of St. Louis, not including the Missouri. And then down at the Gulf, what we call the Mississippi Atchafalaya Basin, we have 4.5% of the land, about 6% of the water, and 29% of the nitrate. And so, you know, this dead zone, it's our problem. We own it, right? And so, you know, we have an obligation to other people in this country to clean up our act. And so is it getting better or worse? Well, for nitrate, it most clearly is getting worse. We look, these lines are 5-year running annual averages. The red line is the state as a whole has about doubled since 2003 in terms of our nitrogen load. Areas going to the upper Miss have increased about 72%. Areas going to the Missouri have increased 191%. So why have things worsened so much rapidly in western Iowa? And it's because, that historically has been a lot of pasture in western Iowa that has been converted to row crops, especially with the emergence of the renewable fuel standard in 2005. And so when we started using corn for fuel in this country, we caused a lot of acres of corn that wasn't into crops to go into crops. And so that has consequences for the environment. And so the other thing we don't like to talk about here, and I know there's a lot going on here, but we have a mass balance problem. We just cannot bring ourselves to admit that we have a mass balance problem. And what I mean by that is the inputs that we apply to the crops exceed what's removed in the grain by quite a large amount. And so these wide bars are the inputs. And you can see there's commercial nitrogen, hog manure, beef manure, and so forth. The yellow bars are what's being exported in the grain. The red bar, or red line, is the surplus, okay? And the blue line is what's in our streams. And so we know of this surplus, about 32% of it makes it into our streams. But we never want to talk about the surplus or the inputs. It's the third rail of Iowa agriculture to tell a farmer he's applying too much nitrogen. And so we know that Iowa State has their N rate calculator where you can go in there, put in the price of corn, put in the price of nitrogen, and it'll give you a number of their recommended N rate. And we know farmers are applying, 25, 30, even 50% more than that recommended rate on the N rate calculator. And so that surplus, it just doesn't go off into the Milky Way, right? It goes somewhere, and the somewhere is in our water. But, we want to sell nitrogen in this state, right? We have, about 10 ag retail outlets in every county per average. I mean, we sell billions of dollars of nitrogen. Nobody wants to sell less nitrogen, right? If you're selling stuff, do you really want to sell less of it? If that's how you're earning your living? No. But we just cannot bring ourselves to talk about this. And so this is all summarized in this paper here. If you're interested, it's open access. And like I said, if you can't remember, you can get the slides tomorrow. And so I thought I'd also spend a little bit of time tonight talking about some work I did on this water quality index. And so DNR contracted with me about 5 or 6 years ago now to create a new water quality index for the state of Iowa. What is that? It's a single value, a single number that can tell you how good the water is, okay? And this is a concept that goes back a long time. And so Iowa had a water quality index. DNR created it in 2005. It was based on this one created by the National Sanitation Foundation. And agriculture didn't like it because it always rated our streams poorly. And so this is the old index here, and you can see the years and the percentage of our streams that measured very poor, fair, and good. And certain groups in agriculture hated this thing, you can imagine, because they saw it as bad publicity. In some years, almost no streams rated good or excellent. And so there was a budget problem in DNR, and they couldn't do pesticide monitoring anymore. That caused their water quality index to collapse, so they contracted with me to create a new one, which I did. They never adopted it. It sits on the shelf there in the Wallace building. But anyway, a year or two ago, I decided I was going to try to give this thing some legs, and so here I am. And so this is my index where I rate all the waters, all these watersheds across the state, okay? And my index is based or patterned after the water quality index used in the province of Alberta and Canada. And so using their scales here, you can see greater than 96 excellent, 81, 95 good, and so forth. And you can see where our waters are in terms of that scale, and then you can see where they are relative to each other in Iowa. And, you know, our worst streams are in western Iowa. These are the ones that have been highly channelized and straightened. So if you've ever been out there and seen like the Boyer River, for example, it's a total ditch from the very top all the way down to the Missouri River. You know, it's terrible. It's one of our worst streams. Our best streams are in northeast Iowa, Bloody Run Creek, which has been in the news a lot, 11,000 head cattle confinement going in up there. That's our best stream. The upper Wapsie above Independence is pretty good. The head waters of the Cedar are pretty good. And so, you don't need to see all of this, but when I looked at trends going back to 2000, at these 44 sites, 3 out of 44 are improving using my index. And so 16 out of 44 relatively unchanged, 25 out of 44 getting worse. And so my index is based on nitrate, phosphorus, turbidity, E. coli, and dissolved oxygen. Okay, so you can see the water here is not getting better. Okay, only 3 streams getting better. The stream that's improving the most is the North River at Norwalk. And so guess what's happening there? Urbanization, right? Des Moines is urbanizing to the south and west, taking land out of agriculture, putting it in urban area, and that's our stream that's improving the best, improving the most. And so here I'm at the end of my career, and so people ask me what we need to do, and what I say is save Northeast Iowa. It's the only thing we have left that has any biological integrity. We only have about half the land that's farmed up there. And so we really, in my estimation, need to pull out all the stops to save what we have up there. It's the last thing that we have that's still got some integrity. Okay, the streams aren't straightened. They still have the rock and gravel substrate, and so let's save it. If we're going to spend public money, let's do it up there. This is what I call the hopeless zone, the hopeless area. The streams are all incised. They're all down in these canyons. You know what they look like, right? You live here. And so the amount of money it would take to repair this is monstrous, okay? And so why we use our tax dollars to do watershed projects, for example, in the Floyd River, in far northwest Iowa, that has one permitted CAFO per section, okay? Is 890 square miles approximately in the Floyd River watershed. We have 860 or 880 permitted confinements. Why would we do that? It makes no sense. We have a problem of scale there, that the amount of money we would have to spend to overcome that, it just does not make sense. And so how do we ever overcome these structural drivers to bad water quality? And what are those? Well, monocropping with the corn and soybeans. And, some of you maybe have heard of Matt Liebman. He's retired now, a professor at Iowa State. Spent his whole career advocating for these diverse farming systems with extended rotations that would include other crops beyond the corn and soybeans. And so he has his various rotations there, and that's one of them, corn, soybean, oat, and 2 years of alfalfa. This extended rotation uses 91% less nitrogen fertilizer, 97% less herbicide. The weed biomass in both of these systems was similar, even though you're using 97% less herbicide. Soybean sudden death syndrome was almost eliminated. The soil health was better. The stream or tile nitrate was 57% lower. Soil erosion was cut in half. Used 60% less fossil fuel. And the net returns to the farmer were similar in both of these systems. And so why don't we do this is the question. And so, you know, there's theories on this, but, you know, to do this takes time, okay? To farm corn and soybeans these days, if that's all you do, that doesn't take too much time, right? You know, the 2 weeks planting, 2 weeks spraying, 2 weeks harvesting, and then go to Florida. And so we have a lot, and I'm sorry to say this if I insult anybody here, but we have a lot of people in Iowa that are working 6 and 8 week a year jobs that are making, $250,000 a year. And all of that is indemnified by the taxpayer. So what, if you were one of these people, what would motivate you to change? Okay? So these farmers, I tell people this, the farmers, it's not that they're evil. The problem isn't that they're evil. The problem is that they're human beings. Right? And so if you're one of those human beings, why would you change? And so society has to demand a structure such that we can reconcile our environmental objectives while still maintaining some level of prosperity, on our land. And I myself do not think it's fair to the average Iowan that we indemnify this farming system where a lot of these people are really making some righteous bucks. Not all of them, but a fair amount of them. Okay? They have a lot of wealth built up in land, and we should not be indemnifying this system. If we do, we should have some say in how it is operated. And so can we regulate? Well, regulation is not going to inoculate our water from pollution. People should understand that. But it can help us at least start changing this structure of things that produces the pollution. So, I have my 5 things. Ban cropping in the 2-year floodplain. We have 400,000 acres in Iowa that are cropped in the 2-year floodplain. Why are we doing that? Every other year, the inputs to that land gone to the Gulf of Mexico. Ban fall tillage. Iowa State has been putting out guidance on fall tillage since the 1980s. It says one thing: don't do it. But you can drive all over Iowa in the state in November, and 60–75% of it is tilled. Why are we doing that? I'll tell you why. Because these farmers have gotten so big, if they want to do tillage, they can't get it all done in the spring. Okay? And so they got to till some of it in the fall if they're going to do their tillage, and if they're going to get down to Florida. Not my problem. Okay? Why should I accept that as an impairment for my water? Okay? I should not have to agree to that. Ban manure on snow and frozen ground. Yes, we do have some rules, but the loopholes are so huge that it's easy to get around them. And March 1st, you can start applying it. If there's snow on the ground on March 1st, you can bet your bottom dollar there's some manure on it somewhere. Make farmers adhere to the ISU fertilization guidelines, and then we need to reformulate these CAFO regulations. The way the manure management plans are currently constructed, we endorse an over-application of manure. Okay? So the manure management plans have been created around the old yield goal formula for nitrogen application, and that strategy was discredited 30 years ago. As a way to apply nutrients, but that is what our manure management plans are based on here in Iowa. And so consequently, farmers can over-apply manure nutrients by quite a large amount, and that activity is endorsed by the state. It's totally legal. We need to revisit that. And so the other thing I think we need to consider is, as we make these changes, we're not doing it in a system that has stationarity. Okay, things are changing, right? And so as we design our systems and we try to get the water quality that we want in the future, we have to understand the climate is changing. And so I get a lot of mileage out of this graph. This is the Raccoon River watershed. It's annual precipitation, and 100 years, I divide that 100 years into two 50-year chunks. And the first 50 years, precipitation in the Raccoon River watershed exceeded 1 meter. okay, 1,000 millimeters, exactly one time in 50 years. In the first 50 years, going back to 1916. In the last 50 years, it's exceeded 1 meter 15 times, okay? In the last 50 years, and in terms of drought, less than 600 millimeters. In the first 50 years, 9 times, less than 600 millimeters. In the last 50 years, only 2 times and none since 1980. And so a lot of us think, 2012, wow, that was horrible, right? 2012 would barely even register, as a severe drought here in this first 50 years. And so it's getting wetter here, right? It's getting wetter. And so what are farmers going to do as it gets wetter? They're going to put in more tile. They're going to do other things to make maximizing output on their fields, a high probability. But a lot of those things, like applying more nitrogen. If it rains more, well, we know, the literature tells us, what are farmers going to do if it rains a lot? They're going to come back with more nitrogen. Like I said, that first application, it didn't go into the Milky Way, right? If they lost it, it went into our streams. And so as it gets wetter, farmers are going to respond. And the way they respond is going to degrade our water. And so as we design our systems, we have to account for climate change. And so I end here with this graph here. What I did is I looked at all the livestock here and all our watersheds in Iowa. So these are all the Huckade watersheds in Iowa. There's 56 of them. I looked at the fecal waste that was being generated by all those livestock, converted it to a human equivalent, and there's the effective population that we have in all our watersheds in Iowa. Okay, and again, I say we have a problem of scale here. Can we do this and get the water that we want? And my opinion is no. And so as we move forward, right now we have a system designed around commerce. The system we have is designed to maximize the amount of money that a few people in Iowa can make. Will we ever design a system around human nutrition? Okay? That's what we need to do. Yeah. If we can do that, maybe we can get the environmental outcomes that we want. And so thank you for inviting me to speak, and that's all I have.
Chris, some of the farm organizations are saying, based upon the adoption of conservation practices, that our water quality is getting better. I'm setting up for that, though, but tell me what you think about that.
So nobody really is saying that nitrogen is getting better. They are saying that, well, our practices that we implemented are sequestering or quenching, I think they're saying 1 million pounds of nitrogen per year. Well, maybe. I mean, we know what the book values are on these practices, and so from the literature. But at the same time we're implementing these practices, we're putting in more tile, we're bringing in more animals, we're doing other things, and so the farm groups don't like to look at both sides of the ledger, okay? They look at these practices and say, oh, look what we've done, things are getting better. But none of that integrates any actual water quality data. And so we hear all the time, oh, phosphorus has improved 27%. We've almost met the water quality goal for phosphorus reduction. Not a shred of water quality data goes into those statements. And so, in truth, we have a paper on phosphorus too that shows phosphorus loading increasing. And so if we're gonna, what's our metric? Is our metric how many practices we can put on the ground, or is our metric how much could we improve our water? If it's a second thing, we have to look at both sides of the ledger. Yes?
Have you given all this information to the state legislature and people? How many times have you done that?
Well, not in a while. There was a few committees I testified before, but that was before I ever worked at the University of Iowa, and I don't think they're going to let me anywhere near that place these days. So, yes.
There was a thing on NPR in the last week, I think it was, about a stream in Iowa that came off the,
Yep, it's up in the Maquoketa River watershed.
and I think I heard that it took them a long time to do it, like 20 years.
20 years.
So that doesn't seem very optimistic.
So, and that was a Huck 12 watershed in Iowa, and I can't think of the name of that stream. Is it Duck Creek, maybe? Farmers Creek. It's in the Maquoketa watershed. Yes, they got it delisted. They got the cattle out of the streams, cover crops, all that. They got it delisted. It took 20 years. That's a Huck 12 watershed. There's 1,660 of them in Iowa. And so look how much money they spent up there. And so the Iowa Flood Center, I don't work there, but they're part of IIHR. They estimate for water quality in Iowa, it'll take about $1 million per year per Huck 12 watershed. So there's 1,660 of them, so that's $1.7 billion a year to do what they did up there at Farmers Creek. Yes, sir.
I've been away from the state for a while, got back. What about in the colleges here? Iowa has some brilliant minds in this agricultural state to study this stuff. Aren't the young people coming out of these colleges sort of taking over the family farms? Do they have better practices as opposed to the old school management?
So we've gotten rid of the moldboard plow, right? And so we don't use the old John Deere plow anymore, except for on about 25% of the farms, which, you know, is way, way too much. And so we have done some things in terms of soil erosion, and we know for pretty good certainty that the sheet and rill erosion and the wind erosion has decreased in Iowa over the last 40 years or so. With nutrients, it's been a different story. We've had a really difficult time, and so, you know, there's lots of theories on that. Why can we not achieve nutrient improvements like we did with soil erosion? And the thing people forget about is the 1985 Farm Bill had conservation compliance. And so if you were farming highly erodible land in Iowa and you wanted to participate in federal farm programs, you had to adopt certain conservation compliance measures. It worked. We know for a certainty that that worked. We need conservation compliance for nutrients. There's nothing to compel farmers to adopt these practices. Nothing. And it does not help their bottom line, for the most part, to arrest this nutrient loss from their fields.
One other question. What are these blooms on the water coming in here? Is that nitrate? Is that not too much oxygen in the water? What's going on?
No, it's nitrogen and phosphorus. And so it's totally nitrogen and phosphorus. And so I know when they restored the lake here, we get all these soil erosion things, right, to keep soil on the landscape. The problem is these soil erosion practices do really nothing for nitrogen, because nitrogen is really soluble. It comes through the tiles or through the shallow groundwater. And we did nothing to reduce the number of hogs upstream from this lake, right? And so I don't know how many there are, but I know there are 39 manure management plans that claim 19 fields upstream from this lake. And so if you want to improve this lake, I mean, there you go. How do you deal with that? I don't have the answer.
Dr. Jones, thank you very much, even though I'm depressed. And that is, I've heard that under the current electrification in Iowa, it would take 100 years to fix this thing. And we don't have that long, and I'm just wondering if you have any advice for us about what we might be able to do about it.
The huge opportunity that we have right now is to get rid of ethanol.
To get rid of what?
With the emergence of electric vehicles, and, you know, it's the best opportunity we've ever had to improve the environmental conditions. Now, do all those acres have to go out of production? No, right? And so let's figure out what to do with those acres now. Because when ethanol goes away, yes, it is going to affect land prices here. People are going to lose some wealth. There's no doubt. The price of land here is kept artificially high by their controlling. So let's start figuring out now